Hello everybody and welcome to the What If group build submissions. So this is the time where we get together and explore all of the things that people submitted as part of a group build. Hello, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me as we look through these wonderful submissions. As this is a live stream, just bear with me as I see in the chat if everyone can hear and see what I've got on the screen. So if you can, just pop a thumbs up in the chat and then we will get into it. As this is a live stream as well, I will pop into the chat and see what people are saying periodically, and we may enter little bits of discussion in places. So I can see we've got Julian's in, ACF Nuggets here, Alpha Aiden, Supercar, Nate, Titanic Lovers here. So there's some familiar names. Flippy Rocks here as well. Airbus for Life is here. Gary's here. Hello everyone, welcome along. It is a bank holiday today, which is wonderful, which means I've got the time to do this stream. And I can see some thumbs up, so that means we'll get into this. So the first thing we need to discuss is the theme. So the theme that was chosen this time, and the themes are generally chosen by you inside the Discord server. So it's usually put to a vote, and the most popular one is the one that we go with. So this one is called What If, and the rules are generally as long as it answers a what if question, then it will be suitable. So we had a couple of examples down there, such as what if jet engines were never invented, and perhaps the example was an F-15 but it only ever used propeller engines, or what if the RAF ran out of camouflage paint and only had orange. So you know, it's answering a question. You could be as crazy as you like, or you know, some people were a little bit more reserved, but it doesn't really matter as long as it answered a what if question. So you could go completely wild. So we're going to just move on to the submissions now, and these are in no particular order, and I will forego saying names because some of them I can't pronounce, but they are all included on the screen. So the first one up is a 1/72 scale Sukhoi Su-33. This is the Zvezda model kit, and it's in a fictional UN paint scheme which possibly operated from an aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean. This idea is come from an anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion, where, to put it in simple terms, a massive disaster leaves much of the world destroyed, and in that world the remains of the UN get much greater authority than they do today. So what if they used this effectively? As for the build itself, so they've got some points on the build. They say the kit was pretty horrible, despite being a relatively new tooling from 1997. They said it felt a little bit more like an older kit from the 70s. However, it was their first modern jet, and they do feel like there's a lot of things to improve on. They said that they rushed the painting process, probably just to get it inside of the time frame. But when it comes to painting, they did feel like they overdid the post shading. You know what? I don't think you did. I think given what we can see here, it looks all right. If it is a bit like post-apocalyptic, I think these aircraft wouldn't be particularly well maintained. So yeah, I think they would be a little bit more tatty. They said they didn't want to go through the hassle of ordering custom decals either, so they ended up free painting the markings, which actually is fine. I think that given your fictional scenario, it's likely they may have free-handed that as well. So despite your problems that you encountered, I think you've done a good job of this, and it does look interesting and different, and it fits an interesting story. So yeah, don't be so hard on yourself. I think the post shading is quite good given the sort of post-apocalypse kind of event that's happened. So let's move on to the next person. Thanks for taking part. So the next person is a what if the monoplane never became a popular idea. What they've done here is they've taken a Hawker Tempest and effectively gone, well, what would a Hawker Tempest look like if it was a biplane? So everything basically has to have an extra wing, doesn't it? So in this one, it is an Airfix Tempest, and the underwing and landing gear is from an Eduard BF-109 G10. I imagine that they probably would have used a smaller wing underneath. Yeah, it looks good, doesn't it? It looks like you can see where this is going. The Tempest wings are higher up on the fuselage, and you've got the BF-109 wings lower underneath. It was all hand painted, and they say the conversion was relatively easy, and they did use some filler and bits of sprue were used as the struts. And I think that's really smart. I think it's really intelligent. I think maybe, and I know you went for the 109 landing gear. It looks quite narrow, given sort of the amount of mass that a biplane Hawker Tempest would have. So I wonder if maybe they would have maybe made that a little bit wider. But I exactly see where you're going from. It does look fun. I love the idea here. I could be tempted to explore something like that as well in the future. So well done. Thanks for taking part. Let's move on to the next submission. And this is quite a fun one. What if the Concorde was used for military service? So this is a Concorde. They've given it the registration of GBOAC, and supposedly it was requisitioned by the RAF for long-range strike and reconnaissance purposes. The kit itself is the 144th scale kit from Revell, and they say the build was pretty good. There wasn't that much to worry about it. It was relatively easy to build, but they did decide to have the landing gear raised, hence why it's on a flight stand. And I love putting my kits on a flight stand as well. It's one of my favourite things to do when I've got a model. They say the paint scheme was a little bit more complicated. The main colour was Tamiya Royal Light Grey, the nose and the end of the plane being a little darker, and the leading edges of the plane and part of the tail were white. The tinted canopy was made using a permanent marker, while the frames were painted matte black for anti-glare. They did use some aftermarket RAF low-vis decals. These were from Mark 1, and they added these, saying that they are good quality, although a little tricky to add. They did add on extra cruise missiles and things as well, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right, underslung underneath the aircraft. They've got some air-to-air ones there as well. These are from Pit Road, such as the Sidewinder Sparrows and cruise missiles. The paint scheme was based on the British military aircraft in the period of the 70s and 80s, and weapons are of a suitable time frame to reflect that. But yeah, this is quite fun. This is pretty interesting. I wonder what they would have used the internal space, so all of the passenger seats, for inside of the aircraft. I imagine they would have fitted in surveillance kind of stuff. Maybe they would have added extra fuel internally as well for longer range missions. But yeah, this is a really fun idea. I love the idea that you've done with this, and I add a big fan of the addition of the external stores as well. Let's just take a quick moment to look at the chat. Gary is saying that apparently this was a consideration by the MOD. So that's fascinating, isn't it? Julian says that YouTube decided not to refresh the screen, which sometimes happens when live stream starts. Yeah, YouTube does what YouTube does. Fantastic. Let's move on to the next submission. And this is the one you may have seen from the thumbnail. What if the United States used ME-262 for ground attack? So this is exploring perhaps a fictional timeline where the United States has got their hands on this. Or maybe the ME-262 saw longer service and the Americans took it on. This is the SMER 172nd scale ME-262, and they've designated an A-262C Swallow light attack aircraft. Although it doesn't look, there's nothing looking light about this, is it, given the amount of munitions it's carrying. They say the kit is nice and easy to build, and quite a few people at the local modelling club wished them luck because SMER has a bit of a reputation, but they say they didn't need it in the end. They say the parts fitted very well. They were quite simplistic in the details, in particular in the cockpit and landing gear bays, but generally not terrible. The forward fuselage cheeks are meant to house two 20mm high velocity cannons. On the belly, there is a bulge behind the main gears, which is meant to simulate an air-to-ground radar. Again, there's a black radar antenna with this, and there is a radar altimeter and engine beacon light. So you've added some extra bits and pieces. There are countermeasure dispensers as well. On the wings, there are lots of missiles. There are AGM-88s, AGM-65s, and AIM-9Bs. They said, I think you had 9Ls, but you didn't want to waste 9Ls on that, so you gave them 9Bs instead. But there are also lots of photo etch panels and things which were added too. The decals were from Mr. Craft, and they had problems with them, as we can all possibly imagine. You know, Mr. Craft transfers are not perfect. They did use some from Hobby Boss and some from other companies as well, just to fill out the paint scheme. But yeah, this is a fantastic and fun looking build. I'm not familiar with this particular kit from Smur, but I think it makes a great basis for the kind of project that you've done here. And it certainly looks interesting, and, you know, it feels like something that perhaps could have happened if things had gone differently. So it is a very interesting model. I do like this one. Let's just take a quick look at the chat. Oh, Fenris is here. Go for it. Paintings dropped in. Yeah, what's that? Thought. Oh, we're swinging back to Concord there. Maybe a revolving bomb bay inside of Concord. That's a good idea, isn't it? So they could have had a revolving bomb bay in the internally, and it just drops out the bottom. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. So let's move on to the next submission. Thanks for taking part. In this one, the question is, what if the IJAAS license produced BF-109Es instead of developing the Key 61? So that's the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force license built version of the BF-109. I think they did kind of want to do that during the Second World War. I think that was sort of an intention. I'm pretty sure that they did get a BF-109 as a trials aircraft, but they never had them like in service. So this is exploring that element of what if. These are in 144th scale, and these are the 109E kits from Beacon Models. And they say that they are a joy to work with. And I have actually built 2 of these now. I built a pre-production sample, and I've also last year built the production sample. And I did find it to be a very fun, quick little build to do. They say that they think it went pretty well. The only issue they had was that the pre-shading was covered too much to really be noticeable. I know I've done that as well. I've done a bit of pre-shading, and then like in the end you just literally can't see it because you went over it too heavy. I don't think it's too bad though. Sometimes it could be subtle, especially in this scale. You don't want it to be too like overbearing. You don't want it to be too powerful. So I think, yeah, this is okay. The decals were a little bit iffy. They say weren't Mark 1 models whose generic roundels they used, but you didn't have enough time. I'm not quite so when we do the submissions for this, people leave me notes to read. I'm not quite sure what you're saying there. It sounds like your transfers you weren't entirely happy with. They use generic roundels from Mark 1 models, which means that they haven't really got any specific identifications, I think. They say they were going to build a diorama base, but they didn't get around to that in time. So maybe you can finish this one and you'll have it ready to go at some point. The coin is for scale. However, it is time period appropriate because it's a 1941 Japanese 1 sen coin, which would be around the time period that this could probably have entered service in Japan. Yeah, no, I like this. I think it's an interesting variation on the BF-109, and you know, potentially its use by an ally. I like that it's a fun little build. I have built some of these myself, and I don't think I think the points that you made in your notes about how this didn't go so well and that didn't go so well, I wouldn't have known if you hadn't have told me. So I actually think you did a good job with that. So well done. Flippy Rock says it's a War Thunder premium. Yeah, that's definitely the way they would go, isn't it? Brilliant. Which, speaking of War Thunder premiums, it's possible that they might consider something like the next submission as well, which is this, which sort of reverses. This is why I put these two together. Actually, this sort of reverses the theme. So this flips it on the other direction. And what if Japan gave Germany aircraft during World War II? So this is a 1/72nd scale N1K1. From Tamiya. This is the 2001 release, and they say the kit was decent enough. It had no serious issues apart from the engine, where supposedly it didn't fit quite as well as they would have liked, but they managed to get it where it needed to go. They say if they were scoring this model, it would get a 7 out of 10. For the decals, they just used decal sheet from a Stuka model, and for the camouflage, They say they really struggled to pick what they wanted to do, so they pretty much just used BF 109 paint scheme for it. So we've done a swap over here. I love this. This is really fun. They say this build met their expectations, and you'd like to explore doing more of this in the future. And yeah, I think you should. I think you've done a good job. You've replicated the what's it, Luftwaffe, the Luftwaffe kind of paint scheme on a Japanese aircraft. And I know you say your colours weren't necessarily completely accurate, but perhaps if these were delivered from Japan, Japan might not have exactly the same kind of colours that Germany would have had. So if they were delivering them, they would have gone, oh, well, we've painted it as close as we could. And we know that that is a kind of thing because look at the P-40, for example. P-40 being one of my favourite aircraft. I know a little bit about it. The Americans built the P-40s and they would paint them in their factories to RAF specifications, and they would use DuPont, I think it was, colours, but they were never quite the exact same match as what the RAF or the British companies who were manufacturing aircraft would use. So they were slightly different shades, which explains why they didn't match perfectly, but they were close enough. Yeah, this is really good fun. I like this. It does look weird in German colours, but I really quite like it. It looks interesting, makes you go, huh, what is that? Yeah, so I think I've got questions. There's a question here I can see. How long will the stream last for? So typically, the live streams do last until I get to the end. At the moment, there were about 30-ish submissions. So if I do 2 minutes per person, that's about an hour. So typically live streams for this last about an hour, but obviously it depends on how much we've got to discuss and how many notes people actually leave me in the Discord server. So yeah, if you do need to drop off, absolutely fine. You can always come back and pick up where you finished. And let's have a look at the next one. So thanks for taking part. This is another kind of World War II crossover. What if the Eurofighter Typhoon was an experimental aircraft during the Second World War? So they've called this the Europe Jaeger Program 1940. The idea for the build was, what if a modern Eurofighter Typhoon was experimental during the Second World War? So they've used the Revell 144th scale Eurofighter as the base, and it has been heavily modified. So parts they've used are 1/72nd scale drop tanks. They've scratch built engines and made propellers out of card. Wing tips were added from a 1/70 scale twin Otter, and they added wheels to the tips of the wings as well, probably for stabilization. Maybe the alloys that they use aren't quite as strong if they'd used them in the past. A canard was reused as a vertical stabilizer on the underside as well. So the canards are not there. So it's pretty much just a delta wing at this point, isn't it? The cockpit itself was rebuilt into a World War II style. And everything on the plane was airbrushed, including the stencils. Since it's a small plane, it will be a little bit underwhelming. So they decided to build this base. And you can see it's like sort of a fortified, like, I don't know, what would we call this? Like a ground handling area. And it's got some ground equipment with it as well. There is the bomb rack, a ladder. There's also a bit of tarpaulin draped over the aircraft. They say it was a fun and interesting project. And yeah, I can agree. It looks pretty cool. It's an interesting take on the Eurofighter. I love that it's a pusher aircraft with the two props on the wings. I wonder what you would use the air intake and the main engines for. Perhaps it's got jet engines actually in there, because I know they were working on jet engines, so perhaps it actually has 4 engines. What if it's got 2 of those like Junkers Umo engines internally and then 2 prop engines on the wings, just in case. So I like this. I think this is a fun idea. I think you added cannons on the nose as well. Yeah, it's really nice. I love this. I love the little diorama you went for it as well, keeping it sort of hidden away from Allied photo reconnaissance aircraft. Yeah, a dispersal, Julian. Yes, I think a dispersal is what I mean. I couldn't think of the words; they escape me sometimes. So thanks so much for taking part. We're actually going to stay with the theme and go to a tornado. But this is what if Germany won World War II and developed the tornado as a result. So there's a little backstory that in the 1970s, as the Cold War rages on, there are four different sort of powers: the Greater German Reich, the Italian Empire, Imperial Japan, and the United States. And all of these major nations have tried the swept wing design. The US has had success with their F-111 Aardvark and the F-14 Tomcat. So in conjunction, Germany wanted one for the Luftwaffe, and they submitted their own design, which was the Tornado. This was designed with the idea of interdiction, launching hit and run surprise attacks on supply hubs, roads, bases, trains, etc. So this is a bit like Man in the High Castle kind of inspired. They say the kit is from 1998, but generally not too bad. It is quite detailed. It has rivets. There is a bit of flash, but it was easy enough to clean off. Although the bad parts are sometimes the wrong part numbers. The sprues aren't separated with being identified A, B, C, etc. So it was a little bit difficult to find the relevant things. They said it was disappointing as well that the kit didn't come with any armament other than the air-to-air missiles, so they had to use bombs and things from their spares box in order to actually, outfit the aircraft. They say it was a fun build though, with its own challenges. The Revell kit is probably still one of the best 72nd scale tornadoes, as there's still no one making a new tooling. Supposedly, I'll have to look into that. But yeah, no, it's a fun little build. I think you've done a good job of this. The paintwork is absolutely wonderful. I do like the fictional scheme here. So it's very Man in the High Castle, very almost like, it's not quite Wolfenstein, is it? But it's getting there. These fictional aircraft are good fun. So thanks for taking part. Let's stick with there's a lot of German aircraft in this, isn't there? This seems to be quite a popular theme. So this one and actually the next one sort of go together as well. So this is what if the Second World War continued long enough for the GO 229 to enter service. So this is Revell's 1/48 scale 2021 release of the Horton GO 229A. However, they knew before getting this kit that it was originally tooled by Dragon back in 1992. As it's an older sort of tooling and it's been reboxed, it does have a bit of flash, and there are sink marks, and the fit was questionable in places. Supposedly, the fit of the joint of the wings, when they add it to the centre section, was a bit of a struggle, and there were sink marks on the air intakes. They managed to fix that though, and it wasn't too much of a problem. They did use photo etch, and they did weathering on this as well. They used seatbelt buckles and seatbelts for the photo etch, and they had to use some masking tape in order to get them in correctly. Some exhaust staining was done and a panel line wash, although they say that it doesn't seem particularly strong. Do you know what actually panel line wash is? Sometimes you don't need to add too much because it's overbearing otherwise. So actually I think you did a good level of it. And typically you will see it more on a lighter surface, so like the lighter underside will show up better than on the top surface, which is fine. That's not a problem. The base paint scheme is RLM 81/82 Splinter camo with 76 on the underside, but they did use some 74 or 75 Splinter camo panels on the port engine and painted the ailerons in a 74 and 75 pattern, which came from the idea of a image they saw from a 109. There are some bare metal panels as well, and some RLM 84 on some of the panels on the lower side. They think that there would have been alternate panels because potentially different parts were painted in different factories, and some panels would have been, made differently or from a different aircraft. They say on the whole they enjoyed this build, but they don't think they will do it again due to the fit issues. They really enjoyed doing it though, and looking into the research into late war Luftwaffe camouflage and paint schemes. Yeah, do you know what? This is a great build. I like this one. I like the idea of it, and I also like these little bits of attention to detail that you've done with the different panels being different colours. And don't worry too much about your weathering, because sometimes weathering can be too much. So I think you've done a good job here. Oh, John Alex here. Welcome. Thanks for dropping in. Ian's here as well. Nice to see so many popular, sorry, not popular, but familiar names. That's what we're looking for. Lots of familiar names. Let's move on to the next one, which links to this, and it is another one. This time we've got both engines off. This is again the same aircraft, exactly the same aircraft, but done a little bit differently. So I love that people take the same idea, but they change it up. So this is again, what if World War II dragged on long enough to enter production and join service with the Luftwaffe. Generally, they say the construction was pretty similar. They had a gap at the wing roots, so they had to fill that in with some styrene. They say the instructions were not particularly clear, and they just tried their best. They say that there's not a great deal to discuss about this kit. They say it's they say it looks nice, but they weren't particularly excited about the kit. Weathering was a simple matter. It was an enamel wash. Try saying that. And some oil paint. They say that the most interesting part of this build was doing the diorama base. It's a piece of plywood, but they added various elements to it. MiG ammo mud effect was used for the ground texture, Woodland Scenics ground foam, and Bachmann Scenescapes foam. They added in some Woodland Scenics material for trees and deadfall, and some AK scenery material. The figures are from an ICM figure set, and they wanted to include it because of the little dog that's in there. They have a good variety of figures and have lots of potential in terms of storytelling. So we've got our mechanics here trying to look over why this aircraft is not working, whilst there's another figure there playing with the dog because, you know, what else is there to do at this point? They can't find out what's going on. The gremlins are holding this aircraft back and it can't get into the air at the moment. So yeah, good build. I love the last two we've just had. It's nice to see these kinds of things developing our skills. Granted, some kits that we build are not as good as others, but I think if you didn't tell me that you had problems, I wouldn't be able to see them. So good job, everybody. Let's move on to this one. What if Thailand bought F-20 Tiger Sharks to replace the F-5? This is a 144th scale kit from CC Lee, and the decals were from Siam Scale. They say the instructions were pretty horrendous, and you might as well look up the original instructions online because the CC Lee ones that were provided were not so good. There were gaps, in particular where the wing joins the fuselage, and they had to fill that with putty and even add some extra plastic from plastic sheet. There are also panel lines which have alignment issues, and the depths of these panel lines are inconsistent. They said that painting was a bit of a challenge. This scheme doesn't have any painting instructions for Tamiya paint colours, so they had to use a bit of a conversion and then mix the different Tamiya colours together in order to get a closer match. They say the scheme was also pretty complex for brush painting, but they tried their best. And actually, I think you did a good job. I think you managed to get there with where you were going with this one. They say the decals were also another problem, being as small as they were, seeing as this is a tiny 144th scale kit. So the 144th scale decal sheet they were using is in essence a scaled down 1/72nd scale one. So they say that when they got the sheet, they realized that the company hadn't resized the instructions as well, the instruction numbers, so you can find it, so you couldn't actually correctly identify which ones were which. Oh, that's hilarious. So you just did your best. You did your best with what you had. Panel lining, though, they say was pretty straightforward. They did mix the color up. It was a little bit too dark, but, you know, that's fine. It happens. We learn from it. I don't think it looks too bad, especially in this small scale. And the colors you used, it has a slightly stylistic look to it with the dark panel lines, but yeah, it's all right. I think it's okay. I like it. I think you did a good job, especially for hand painting. Hand painting, even in small scales. I know I've just done a small scale project myself and hand painted it, and the photos can be a little bit more unforgiving because you're zoomed in. But I think you did a good job, and I'm sure from normal viewing distances it looks like amazing. So good job. Oh, Man's Model Moments has dropped in. Hello, welcome. Yeah, you're saying that this was a struggle with decals, I can imagine. Yeah. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. Something that I quite like, and I think you can tell what it is. It's a P40. I love a P40. The question is, what if the Iroquois Confederacy, I hope I said that right, had an air force during the Second World War? So the idea here is that the Iroquois Confederacy formally declared war on Germany as well. And the idea was, what if they genuinely had an air force? So they think they would have been able to procure American examples, such as the P40. And this kit is the Academy 1/72nd scale P40B. They say the kit was fairly fun and easy to build, with just a few fit issues to work out. Since there was no official roundel, they had to come up with one. The flag is purple and white, so that's what they used as the basis of creating the insignia. Creating their own mass for the markings was probably the most difficult part, and they say that whilst it's not perfect, they think the project came together fairly well, and also mimics the look of an aircraft that may have been hastily repainted by hand in the field, and sort of embraces that. So yeah, I think you did a good job. I love the idea of this. It's certainly interesting. I have not built the Academy P40B myself, and I have heard in places that it's, whilst it looks generally like a P40, it's not quite the most accurate P40 out there. One day perhaps I'll have a go at this kit and experience it for myself, but I think you did a good job of this in the fictional scheme that you chose. So good job, well done, thanks for taking part. And this brings us on to someone else, someone who I know is in the chat at the moment, who is Fenris. There we go. This is Fenris's submission of what if Flight 19 actually encountered aliens. So the TBF-1 Avenger from Academy and the Flying Saucer from Atlantis are both in 1/72nd scale and done in this diorama to simulate a what if Flight 19 actually encountered aliens. So I think Flight 19, and I'm sure Fenris will put it in the chat if I'm wrong, but Flight 19 was the flight that went missing sort of over the Bermuda Triangle, and the idea was that it wasn't a navigation issue, it was like they were actually abducted by aliens. So this is a what if that happened. They say nothing was too tricky, nothing too fancy, just 2 kits and a water base. They actually say that in fact the water was the most difficult part. Generally the water was a tinfoil crumpled up, glued into place on some foam, and then extra foil laid over the top, and then it was glued down and painted. The paints were some white, a bit of yellow and turquoise, some squiggly lines of XF17 sea blue, and a bit of clear blue as well. So a bit of a mix and match. I think you did a good job. They say the kits themselves, they went together really nicely. The UFO, though, could have benefited from a bit more extra detail, which if you had more time and energy, you would have done more about it, but it is what it is. I guess, you know, with group builds, we do run our risk of going against the time. Fenris has confirmed my story is correct, so thanks for that. and Man's Model Moment says, but that really happened, Fenris, so that doesn't count. So as you say, it's possibly not the best diorama you've ever done, but with the time that you had, I think you did a good job. I think you did a fantastic job. I think here you do say you had been able to track down some Flight 19 decals for the Avenger, but there were none in stock. So you went with the generic identifiers on the planes rather than the specific aircraft ones, which is fine. I think I love the aircraft you've done here. The Academy Avenger, it's the Academy Avenger. Let me just go back and check. Yeah, the Academy Avenger, I've heard reasonably good things about it. I think it's quite an old tooling, but for an older tooling, it still builds up pretty nice, and yours looks pretty good. And that UFO, yeah, it looks I find it hilarious that the UFO is like an actual kit from Atlantis, when it looks almost like they designed it off of like yogurt pots and things. So that's good fun, isn't it? Well done, Fenris. Thanks for taking part. This brings us into a bit of world building now. So this is going completely away from all of the aircraft and vehicles that we've seen so far. And this is a what if the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was a medieval fantasy kingdom. So this is a bit of world building. The kit is the Kingdom of Bretonia Pegasus Knights by Games Workshop in 1/56th scale. They've got this little diorama here, which is 32 by 16 centimeters, and they used wood, bamboo, XPS foam, cardboard, clear plastic, kitchen sponge, and some basing materials from Army Painter. They used some 2-part epoxy putty, texture paste paints from Italeri, Army Painter, Pentart, and Vallejo. They say the kit was easy enough to build. There are 2 options for the Pegasus heads and 3 for the knight helmets. The Games Workshop kit only offers the lance as a wielded weapon, and minor modifications such as the crown on the serpent crest and the bolted shield on the yellow knight. Biggest challenge of the build was the scenery, specifically the river and the castle. Yes, I can imagine. Is that castle on fire? That's insane, isn't it? Good job on that, if that is on fire. It looks like there's smoke coming out the top of it, or just sort of out of the top of the tower in the centre. The diorama shows a trio of knights, each belonging to a high noble house of Lithuania. So there's the different houses, and they are flying over the countryside. The second challenge was to decide which houses to use. A lot of Lithuanian nobility have white sigils on red fields for their coats of arms, and some are easier to freehand than others. This what-if scenario is based on their own creative writing side project called Europa Regnum Magica, an alternative history scenario where the sack of Rome in 410 AD was used to fuel a sorcerous ritual to open a dimensional rift and allow all things magic to enter the world. And we're having to sort of defend the realm, I suppose. They did go into a lot of detail on the world building. So if you want to know more about the timeline in this sort of fictional world which breaks off from our own, I have put it all here in sequence from left to right. If you want to stop and read, absolutely fascinating. You've gone so far and beyond with the sort of the brief, and it's great. I love it. So if you do want to know more about this world building, take a look, pause the video, pause the stream, and then carry on when you've read it. Now it's time to move on. Sandwich says, feel free to say my name when my submission comes up. It's not too difficult. Well, I'll see what happens. It's time to move on to this, which is another tornado. And this is what if Jordanian tornado IDS fighters actually were a thing. So this is the Revel tornado in 144th scale, also known as the best scale, apparently. And it's presented as a what if of Jordan concluding its contract for these fighters in 1989. It depicts an aircraft in service in the early 2000s, and they say the model goes together pretty nicely. It didn't really much require any fixing or correction of the parts. They did leave the ordnance and landing gear off until the bulk of the painting was done, and the paint scheme was mainly freehand airbrushed. The insignia, however, are hand painted, and actually I probably wouldn't have noticed that if you hadn't have told me. So your painting insignia is very neat and tidy. They did add some light chipping and various weathering effects using oil paints, not their usual subject matter as it's more modern than you normally do, but they say it went together pretty easily. And yeah, it's a good looking build. I do like the camouflage, and that hand painted insignia is amazing. I would have thought they were decals if you hadn't told me. So good job, well done for taking part. We're taking deviation from aircraft now and going to land vehicles. So this is what if Heart of Iron 4's TNO Last Days of Europe came true. So there is a bit of backstory to this. And I don't really know Hearts of Iron, so I'm going to try and paraphrase it as best I can. So they say when Kemerovo declared itself a principality. Its army was ill-equipped, taking anything left over from the former General Krylov, his command. So a group of soldiers patrolling in their BRDM 2/3 then found a still intact BRDM 2 turret and decided to take it and modify their vehicle to have both the missiles and the turret, which is why the turret is still the base colour and not camouflaged. So the turret is an add-on. They call this new vehicle Kemi Mikoyana, and the name of the command. This is the name of the commander's wife. The APC now heads the 104th Reconnaissance Battalion, which is what the white bar on the engine deck signifies, and the white crosses are to signify the Principality's Kievan Rus background and are always placed on the sides of the hull, turret roof and driver's hatch. The commander expects the surrounding area and I think you mean inspects the surrounding area, and the gunner sits on the deck with his trusty AK in hand, just in case any Black Army cavalry decide to probe the border defences. That's a little bit of backstory there. So this is from Hearts of Iron, which I believe is a computer game, video game. The kit that they've used is DML's BRDM3, and they've used figures from Tamiya, Hella and Verlinden. All of this is in 1/35 scale. On the overall model build, it wasn't particularly hard. They did have to merge the BRDM2 turret to the hull, as it's moulded to fit the BRDM 2/3 for missiles only, which faced a bit of a challenge. Painting wasn't entirely difficult, though. It did take a bit of time. They had to use multiple coats of medium brown to fully solidify the colour. They say they're not entirely happy with the weathering, though, but given the rugged environment, they'd imagine that this vehicle would be pretty tatty. But yeah, they're happy with the build on the whole, and I think it looks fun. I'm not familiar with the game or with this particular vehicle, but I can definitely see where you were going with adding extra bits on, and also the amount of mud. You can see that it's just been driving off-road, to do its own thing to get where it needs to go. So good job, very interesting build. Let's move away from a vehicle and back to an aircraft, because aircraft seem to be the most popular on the server at the moment. And this is a what if the Flying Tigers were British? So this stems from the whole Flying Tigers in China. They flew P-40s. They were the American volunteer group. But the idea here is that perhaps pilots and ground crew that were sent over in this fictional scenario were British instead. Naturally, they say here in their notes that because Britain was, up against the wall at the same time, they sent over what they had available. So they sent over Mark 1s, and they were a bit worse for wear, which is replicated in the paintwork. They are over-weathered with chipping, miscoloured panels, and some left in bare metal in a few places. The idea being that parts have been replaced here and there as they could do, because there weren't the spares from the UK. This is built from the Airfix 1/72 scale Spitfire Mark 1 starter set. I think technically it would be a gift set nowadays. They say it was simple and fun to build with no outstanding issues. The only option in the build is that it only comes with a closed canopy. Yeah, it does. It does only come with a closed canopy, which is a bit of a shame, but it's a cheap and simple kit. And actually, I think they could do with a retool now. It's okay as far as models go, but I think that Spitfire from Airfix is a little bit old. It's nice as a Mojo build, and I think you did a good job. This is certainly an interesting paint scheme, which we wouldn't otherwise have seen, I suppose. Having done this one, it's time to move on to another subject, which is based on the same model kit. And lo and behold, it's mine. There it is. So it's exactly the same kit. It's the Airfix Supermarine Spitfire Mark 1 in 1/72 scale. But my submission was, what if the UK exported Spitfires to the USA before World War II? So perhaps we managed to export some 1938, 1939 as a, not as a trial, as an actual sale, as actual business. I know that they did trial a Spitfire Mark 1 in the very early, like 1939, 1940 period, but that was only as a trial and it wasn't as a production aircraft. So my idea here is we've actually produced these to sell to America, who have then received them. So effectively what we've got here is a Spitfire in early United States colours, in a pristine condition as though it had been delivered to them from the factory. It's got no alterations to the base model kit other than being spray painted silver to simulate bare metal. I just used a cheap rattle can to do this. The decals are from a Brewster Buffalo kit, which I built previously, and the anti-glare panels and walkways are just black paint that was masked. The tail surface, however, I painted that, I masked it using tape and spray painted or airbrushed the relevant colours to kind of mimic what I saw online for an early production version or prototype for the P40. I think that they probably would have kept the original license numbers on it, but there's no insignia on the side because at this point it's ready to be painted however the United States want to. This is literally factory fresh. I did find this one relatively simple and easy to do, not particularly too stressful, and you'll see a full build video on this one coming in the near future. So stay tuned for that. So let's move on. Here we go. Now this is an interesting looking aircraft. This is the MiG-37B Ferret E. And what if this was used in the Cold War? So this is an aircraft I'm not familiar with. Is it a concept or fictional aircraft? But the question here is, what if it was used during the Cold War as a real aircraft? They made it into a diorama, and they say this is their first diorama with an open canopy and crew, and they are quite happy with the results. It's in a snowy sort of location somewhere up north. They had no major problems with this kit. It is the Italeri MiG-37B in 1/72nd scale. They say it fits together pretty nicely, but the only thing they weren't happy with were the provided paint schemes. They say the set schemes were boring, and most metal things or silver or iron were asked to be painted black. So they made their own scheme and painted everything the way they thought it should go. And absolutely, that's the whole point of a what if build. So I've gone one on too far. Gone too far. Oh, stop it! I'm having technical difficulties. Bear with me. Well, we all know whose is going to be next, don't we? I bet Sandwich is well happy now. The diorama on this one was quite straightforward. The only thing they didn't like about that, though, is it used up a lot of their paint, their acrylic paint, that they should have used on the models, but they ended up using it on the diorama. But that's okay, because there will always be the opportunity to get more paint in the future. And I quite like what you did with this little diorama. It does look quite fun. I love where you were going with this one. It does look like a fun kit. It's not a kit that I'm familiar with, but I would like to have a go at it at some point in the future. So thanks for taking part. And we all know who's next. It is Sandwich. This one is, what if an F-18E was used in air races? So this is the Revell 144th scale FA-18E. They didn't like the livery that it came with, and they were looking for an excuse to play around with it. And with the group build, perfect opportunity. See, the build was okay. It would be a 7 out of 10, but there were some annoying gaps on the lower wings, and they had to be filled and sanded. Painting was done with their brand new compressor, which they used Vallejo air paints, passed through their H&S airbrush. It went smoothly and there were no issues. The masking of the canopy and the silver areas worked pretty well, much better than anticipated, but no retouching or corrections were necessary. The photo in the background is from an air show that they attended. So it's all theirs, it's all their images there, no copyright infringement. But they say they might explore some extra photos in the future. And I like this. I think this is a good, fun build. I love the idea of an F-18 being in an air racer. I don't know how many sort of like ex-service jets do end up being air racers or something nowadays. I know a lot of prop planes do tend to be air racers, but I don't know about jets. I wonder if they're more expensive and a bit more cost prohibitive. But I do like where you went with this one. It's a nice, fun little build. Let us move on to another jet, which is this one here. What if South Africa went with the Mirage 2000C instead of the Gripen? So this is the Revell 148 scale Dassault Mirage in South African Air Force service around 2006. Inspiration from renders of a Mirage 2000C in DCS. So they got the idea of to do it like this. What if they had it as an interim fighter or strike plane whilst the cheetahs were being retired and the Gripen was still being evaluated? They're happy with the end results. The kit is pretty decent for an old monogram tooling, so it's pretty old. But overall, it was straightforward build with minimal filling needed. The only difficulty they encountered were getting bombs, a refueling tube, and the decals. But it looks like you managed to do a good job there. Sometimes I find like my spares box is where I keep all this kind of things and I dig out. I go, oh, that'll do. Sometimes it's not period accurate, but it'll do. I think you did a good job of this. I like where this was going. It's certainly a different look for the Mirage. And your build is very neat and tidy. So well done. Thanks for taking part. We're coming on to something else a little bit different now, which is this. So this is a Hawker Hurricane, and this asks the question, what if Germany manufactured the Hurricane and used it in snowy environments? So this is the Airfix Hawker Hurricane Mark 1, and it was their fourth ever model, but they're really happy with this one. The idea being they know that aircraft like the Gloucester Gladiator fought in, snowy environments up north. So why not also the Hawker Hurricane? Perhaps it was manufactured in Poland or Germany and they then used it in these environments, which meant that they could add skis onto it to make it a bit more interesting than just being a German painted aircraft. They like the idea here that the skis can actually retract and they go flush against the lower side of the wing. And the German paint finish is based off of a BF 109, but it's got the yellow tail and nose identification. They say the build was decently easy enough, but with a little lack of experience, there are a few cracks and seams in places. It didn't help that the masking tape they used wasn't particularly good and paint bled through or underneath of it. But on the whole, they enjoyed the build and they learnt quite a lot, which means that they can expand on that for the next group build. Definitely for the next group build, if you're going to do another aircraft, I would suggest that the cockpit canopy framework be the next thing that you focus on painting. But otherwise, I really love the idea here. I love the concept. It is interesting seeing a two-bladed prop Hurricane with skis, and you've put it on some polystyrene to make it look like it's in a snowy scene. So well done. And this is in fact the final submission for this group build. So that's it. That is it. Thank you so much to everybody who took part. What do you think of the submissions? Let us know down in the comments below which one particularly resonated with you. And if you'd like to take part in the next group build or the current group build, we tend to have a group build happening. We usually do it we do a group build for 4 months. So everybody gets a chance to take part. Then we have like a month off and then we do another one for 4 months. So we tend to do 2 a year. So we're currently in the process of one. The one we're in at the moment is called Stealth is Optional. So it's any paint scheme which is, not a camouflage paint scheme. It's not the standard paint scheme it was painted in. It's supposed to be bright and vibrant. But if you want to know more about that, take a look at the Discord server, because the group builds only happen on the Discord server, so we can keep them all in one place. And the links are below. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. The support that these guys give is immeasurable, because it allows me to do this on a regular basis. It allows me to keep creating content, and I'm incredibly grateful that they help keep the lights on for the channel. So a massive thanks to these guys on screen. If you'd like to join them and find out what the extra perks are that you can get from being a Model Club member, such as early access to videos and other behind the scenes perks, take a look at the links in the description. Alternatively, if you'd like to support the channel in any of these other ways, full information is below the video as well. Of course, the last thing to say is that if you don't want to support in this way, but you would like to support the channel in a way, the best way to do that for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on. So please make sure you've subscribed so you don't miss any modeling videos. Finally though, massive thank you to all of you for watching this one. I see that we've got some lovely comments in the chat over here, discussing all of the comments. So if you'd like to make sure that you're part of a stream in the future, do make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any notifications for that. But thank you everybody for watching this one today. Let me know what you thought of everything down in the comments, and I'll see you all on the workbench again next time.